Hello friends, so the Pope died. Let's talk about it. If you don't know me already, my name is Sarah Holkheim. I am an ex-reporter from Washington, D.C. I also am a current Chicago-based comedian and I tour, so I might be coming to a city near you. Follow my Instagram. I put all of my shows on my stories. But yeah, today we're going to talk about the Pope dying, so let's get into it. I'm sure you've heard whispers that this was going to be the last Pope before the end of days. This prophecy actually came from a saint in the 1100s named Saint Malachy. In medieval times, in the 1100s, Saint Malachy visited Rome and had several premonitions. He not only said the number of popes that there would be before Armageddon, but he also named them. Yeah, he had their actual names, and he said very specific things about their lives that would occur, and there's no way he could know that thousands of years in the future. So St. Malachy said that the last pope before the end of days would be the 111th pope, and that is Pope Francis. So does that mean Armageddon is next? Let's dive in, shall we? What St. Malachy said specifically about Pope Francis was final persecution of the Holy Roman Church. There will be reign Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock and many tribulations, after which the seven-hilled city will be destroyed and the dreadful judge will judge the people. The end. So before Pope Francis's death, a lot of people tried to connect him to this prophecy. Yeah, his name wasn't Peter, but they did note that he did have Italian heritage and that his real name was Giovanni di Pietro, which is Peter in Italian. So people were saying, hey, he's the 111th Pope, which is the last Pope before Armageddon, and his name is Pietro, which is Peter in Italian, which is the name that Malachy said was going to be the name of the last Pope. If you look at the Vatican, there is one more picture that is after Pope Francis that is empty. It's a picture frame and it's empty, and that is supposed to be where the last representative of the Catholic Church is, but they don't necessarily say this person will be a pope, and I don't know how they would know that, but they say he's just going to be a placeholder. This is what I've heard, at least. But regardless, we know his name is Pietro, which is Peter, but let's take a look at who is supposed to be the successor of Mr. Pietro, which is Pope Francis. Among the frontrunners to replace Pope Francis are three different cardinals, all of which are named Peter. All three of these cardinals are named Peter. We have Peter Erdő of Hungary, the leading conservative candidate there to be elected Pope. There's Peter Turkson of Ghana, who is a prominent figure in the church's social justice circles, and Pietro Parolin of Italy, one of the most experienced Vatican officials. How are we going to even believe St. Malachy? Like, were his predictions true? Did they come true? Yeah, they actually did. Let's take a look at a few of them. So the 109th Pope, this was 2 popes ago. Remember, this was written in 1100 AD. But Malachy said the 109th Pope would be of half of the moon. And in fact, John Paul I, who was the 109th Pope, was elected Pope in 1978, and it lasted about a month. And that was from the first half of the moon to the next half. 1 half of the moon Pope. So that kind of checked out. As for the Pope after that, John Paul II, Malachy said that he would be de labore solis, which is a Latin saying meaning of the eclipse of the sun. And in fact, John Paul II was born on a solar eclipse. And then his funeral was also on a solar eclipse. So, I mean, the 1100s were a crazy medieval time, but his predictions are ringing to be true in a lot more cases than just this. So when Malachy made these predictions, he said, okay, the next pope that's going to be elected after today, will be from a castle of Tibere. And in fact, the next pope, Celestine II, was from the shores of the Tibere River. St. Malachy also said that another pope would be elevated from the level of a hermit, and in fact, one of the next popes was a hermit in the monastery, and he was elevated to pope. St. Malachy also described the 45th pope specifically would come from the hell of the Pregani. So the 45th Pope ended up being born in Pregano, in a village that translates to hell, called Inferno. I mean, you can look this stuff up. There is a lot more than just what I've described here. But I'm interested in the conspiracy theories too, about this whole transpiring of the death of Pope Francis. It sounded like the Pope knew he was going to be soon. He was like, I'm about to. He knew. He said, forgive those who hurt me. He didn't say, forgive me of my sins, or like, please help me repent. He said, forgive those who have hurt me. It sounds like some people are hurting him. I mean, why would he say that? He was quite literally about to expose people in power, expose misuse of funds in the Vatican, and list names. And they couldn't let that happen, right? He suddenly became ill like a week after he said he was going to do this. That's suspicious. That is suspicious. Let's take a look at the type of pope Pope Francis was.
Pope Francis was a pope of firsts. He was the first pope to come from Latin America, the first to choose the name St. Francis of Assisi, and he was the first pope to come from the Jesuit order, a Catholic religious group known for its service to the marginalised. When Francis was elected, he was an outsider to Rome, and he quickly shook up the Vatican and church establishment. He was a disruptor who called on the church to return to its core mission, welcoming everyone, serving the poor, embracing humility. Francis himself adopted a simple lifestyle, refusing to live in the papal palace. But what did he actually achieve? Well, Francis issued landmark teachings on protecting the environment and working with other faiths. He was a tireless voice for peace, demanding the end to possession of nuclear weapons and abolishing the death penalty. And looking to the future, he called for a treaty to regulate the development of AI. He also shifted the church's approach on LGBTQ+ Catholics by offering blessings to same-sex couples. And he appointed women to senior positions in the Vatican. More than anything, however, Francis reformed the papacy. He was a people's pope who shunned the trappings of office and sought to mobilise all Catholics in the church's mission. Now it is up to the church's most senior figures, the cardinals, to decide who comes next. One thing is for sure, Francis' successor has big shoes to fill.
So he was setting a precedent to helping migrants and those who are underserved. And he was from a group of people who kept these types of underserved, underprivileged people at the forefront of their work and at the forefront of their mind. He even included the Palestine-Israeli war crimes in one of his last statements that was read from the balcony before he died. He called for a ceasefire. Let's take a look.
Preoccupa il crescente clima di antisemitismo che si va diffondendo in tutto il mondo. In pari tempo il mio pensiero va alla popolazione e in modo particolare alla comunità cristiana di Gaza, dove il terribile conflitto continua a generare morte e distruzione e a provocare una drammatica e ignobile situazione umanitaria. Faccio appello ai belligeranti: cessate il fuoco, si liberino gli ostaggi, si presti aiuto alla gente che ha fame e aspira ad un futuro di pace.
I saw someone say online that the passing of the Pope on Easter, 24 hours after meeting J.D. Vance, is the same as Santa Claus dying on Christmas, 24 hours after meeting the Grinch. So that's actually pretty funny. Look, I don't think that JD Vance is inherently evil. I mean, he's just like a Midwestern guy, grew up in Minnesota. You know what I mean? He's not anybody who strikes me as intelligent enough to pull off what people are saying, that he's the Antichrist, that he is this, that he's that. I think that he's just pretty dumb. And I mean, I don't think that he really is inherently evil, but it is quite funny that this happened right after the Pope met with him. I mean, the Pope did tell JD Vance that he sucked and immediately dies, like right after. So the reason why the Pope called JD Vance out is because JD Vance attempted to say that these people, these migrants, and what Trump is doing, sending people to basically live out their lives in a concentration camp, is a part of the concept of Catholicism. In fact, he quoted a medieval concept directly to the Pope himself, who the Pope knows about these Catholic medieval concepts. Like, why would you try to school the Pope on something that he definitely understands? Here is JD Vance explaining the order of love.
There's this old school, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country, and then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world.
Okay, so let's break this down. First, Pope Francis responded by saying, no, that's not what that means. Pope Francis goes on to say that the rightly formed conscience cannot fail to make a critical judgment and express its disagreement with any measure that tactically or explicitly identifies the illegal status of some migrants with criminality, especially if they're seeking refuge in a country trying to not die because they're running from another country that's going to kill them eventually. Like, we get it. There needs to be a due process to come into the country. Everyone needs to be doing it the legal way, but also we need to deport them in a legal way as well. And sending people to encampments or concentration camps or extermination camps, which is what these things are. Nobody ever gets out of this alive. Nobody ever comes back from that. They're notorious for that in these El Salvador camps, in these El Salvador concentration prison camps. They're notorious for not ever letting anyone out. And they say it with complete defiance and complete almost being proud of it, that they're not ever going to get out of this. So they are essentially, without due process, sending people who have never been to El Salvador in their lives to El Salvador and leaving them there in these death camps when their only maybe criminality is crossing the border and trying to have a better life. It's actually insane. And that's what the Pope is saying to JD Vance in this response. In fact, this Catholic concept is actually derived from a Confucius concept, and it says, things have their root and their branches. Affairs have their end and their beginning. To know what is first and what is last will lead near to what is taught in the great learning. The ancients who wished to illustrate illustrious virtue throughout the kingdom first ordered well their own states. Wishing to order well their states, they first regulated their families. Wishing to regulate their families, they first cultivated their persons. Wishing to cultivate their persons, they first rectified their hearts. Wishing to rectify their hearts, they first sought to be sincere in their thoughts. Wishing to be sincere in their thoughts, they first extended to the utmost of their knowledge. Such extension of knowledge lay in the investigation of things. Things being investigated, knowledge became complete. Their knowledge being complete, their thoughts were sincere. Their thoughts being sincere, their hearts were then rectified. Their hearts being rectified, their persons were cultivated. Their persons being cultivated, their families were regulated. Their families being regulated, the states were rightly governed. Their states being rightly governed, the whole kingdom was made tranquil and happy. From the Son of Heaven down to the mass of the people, all must consider the cultivation of the person the root of everything besides. It cannot be when the root is neglected that what should spring from it will be well ordered. So no, this is not a hierarchy of love. This is an explanation on how to make yourself better and stronger from the core so that you can first help yourself, help your family, help your country, and then help the world. Because if the root is neglected, then what springs from it will not be well ordered. So no, J.D. Vance, you completely misunderstood this Catholic concept that was directly taken from Confucianism, which is far more ancient than Catholicism. J.D. Vance just tried to muddle and muck and twist something into whatever his narrative was, and that is truly evil. Now, this is the second time heads of Catholicism, like big heads of Catholicism, have bumped heads with MAGA. And they bumped heads with MAGA by simply asking them to be merciful for the vulnerable. Wow. It's almost as if these MAGA Christians are playing dress up, just being like, I'm a Christian. Look, I have a cross on my neck. This is great. I'm Christian now. And then they're going to twist and turn things to fit whatever ideology they have in their head by completely just dismissing what the actual heads of their religion are saying and telling them to do. But anyways, I'm probably going to talk more about this in the next video, maybe. Let me know what you think about it in the comments. I would definitely like to hear what you have to say. If you haven't subscribed already, definitely subscribe and like this video if you haven't already. By the way, I'm not getting in the algorithm. I'm in the algorithm in TikTok and on Instagram, but I am not on YouTube. So definitely subscribe, like, comment, do all you can so I can get in the algorithm because it's not working. It's not working. But anyways, I think I'm going to talk a little bit more about this again after I get my bearings, but the Pope literally just died today. So I'm kind of just collecting a lot of information and my thoughts and sussing through all of this stuff. So there's probably going to be another video that goes even more into detail, so be on the lookout for that. Subscribe, like, comment, let me know what you think about this video, and I guess I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.